Let's see here. I'm going to share the screen here so we can take a look where we are in class. We are already module 4. We're going to talk about the article by Ta-Nehisi Coates today, which thanks to Jessie, she pointed out that there was a problem with the article, so I posted it again, and it looks like it's good now. I also asked you to take a look at this little article by Friedman. We'll open up with that by way of a segue. And I also included 2 little articles from the New York Times. I think, I know this one's from New York Times. I forget where the other one's from. Very, very intimately related, of course, to the topic of Ta-Nehisi Coates. Since he's written that article about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, this field has really opened up and there's been a lot of interest in it. So studies have deepened, if you will. Next week, your papers are due. I made them due at the end of the day. Okay, they're not due by class time, they're due by the end of the day. So you can submit them anytime, of course. But that means a couple things. First of all, we will be meeting next week at 1. I'll send a reminder. I don't, what we have planned will be, informal. I'm looking to either finish up our discussion of the Ta-Nehisi Coates article, or I'm looking at a couple of video lectures, short video lectures that I might share with you all that we can discuss. And one by Ta-Nehisi Coates, another by Angela Davis. Right. And then next week after class, if anybody wants to chat with me about their papers while you're writing them, then, this gives us that possibility. By the way, 2 weeks from now, you need to have the book by Mariana Mazzucato, so please be sure you get it. One thing I wanted to do today is I want to look at this footnoting and style sheet with you all. It's very important. This is something that I expect you to use when you write papers in this class. First of all, because it talks about the type of footnoting style that I'm looking for you all to use, which is called Chicago style. But this sheet here also talks about how to footnote different types of sources. Now, for these first sources, for these first papers I've indicated to you, they do not need to involve text from beyond what we've read. The final research papers absolutely will, but you are welcome, of course, to cite outside sources. That's fine. First of all, this little grid here is going to be very important, especially as we approach the final paper. This class dealing with economic theory. You may be inclined to cite statistics or figures or graphs, stuff like that. Those kinds of things must, anytime a number shows up in your paper, right? Well, not anytime, but often, especially when you're citing statistics, you've got to footnote these things. Otherwise, I'm going to think you made them up, okay? This little grid here is about the kind of things you need to footnote, what you don't need to footnote. Obviously, when you're using somebody else's words, okay? But also, a lot of people don't know this, so figures, statistics, and data, the second thing. The other thing you need to footnote is reported facts or events that are not common knowledge, okay? And that's kind of a gray area. You're always welcome to ask me. I'm the arbiter of what is common knowledge, so you can ask me. And then diagrams, illustrations, charts, and pictures, okay? Please footnote those as well. Again, this will primarily pertain to your final papers. I have a link here to also about Chicago style footnoting. By the way, I'll remind you of this later, but some of these there are many websites, typically from big state university libraries like Purdue in Indiana, that have a lot of information about footnoting different types of sources, and they have footnote generators. And you can throw all the jumble of bibliographical information into, like a blank, and then press enter, and it'll spit it out in the perfect form that you need. Not that it's terribly complicated to begin with. So what I have here on the sheet is how to footnote different types of sources. A book that's edited, a book that's translated, poem, journal, article in a newspaper, and then non-print media. Okay. Now, listen up. I've been teaching this class, at Mike for a long time, and I have discovered that many high schools, you all do in-text citation. Sometimes that's exclusively what you learn, and that a lot of students are not experienced with creating footnotes. Okay, so that's why I've included a part here on this handout about how to create a footnote in MS Word. And by the way, you can cross out MS Word and insert Google Docs or whatever you're going to be using, because I believe it is largely the same. And anybody out there, if I'm wrong, tell me. But generally, you do your quote. At the end of the quote, you go up to the top you go to the toolbar, you click on Insert, Footnote, and then the cursor is a footer is automatically created. This is the footer here. See this line? And your cursor and is automatically enumerated, and your cursor is plopped right there, and then you start writing your author. See what I did is I wrote a sample paragraph. It's complete bullshit. Don't ever quote it. I made it up for the purposes of this handout. And then I have the author, title, editor, translator, write the whole thing. So anytime, and then of course, don't forget subsequent footnotes from the same source, you can abbreviate it, okay? Author and or title and page number, okay? If you have any questions about footnoting or what footnotes are or creating footnotes, you must get in touch with me, okay? I can also chat with you after class next week. How to footnote multiple sources at once. I wrote a fake sentence here, and I think MS Word created a footnote for me. Here it is. Actually, multiple, some people do funny things. I've seen funny things. Students, they have a quote with two sources and they have two footnote numbers, 1, 2. Don't do that. Single footnote, and then what you do is you add a semicolon between the two sources. It's as simple as that. This is a stylistic issue, formatting. How to format large quotes. I wrote a little fake essay here, and I have this is a quote, right? This is how you format a large quote. What do you notice? Anybody? What stands out?
Quotations.
No quotation marks, right? Which is strange, right? I guess the reason there's no quotation marks is because when you format it like this, you indicate immediately that it is a quote. Anything else stand out to you?
The whole thing is indented on the left, but not on the right.
Yeah, and it's indented how many times?
Twice?
It's indented twice. See, the paragraph itself is indented once. This quote is indented twice. Everything else is the same as usual. Please don't italicize your quotes ever, unless the author italicized something, right? And then footnote as usual. Introduce your quotes. This is also a stylistic issue. Don't just jump into a quote. Tell your audience who is saying it, right? And then finally, how to indicate different titles. This is a little surprising to me, but the last few years I've noticed that students are getting a little lax about indicating book titles. You can't just capitalize a book title. That's illegal. You must underline it or italicize it, okay? Not only that, a newspaper and a magazine title or a movie. If you want to quote from Mall Cop, you're going to have to underline it, okay? Or don't quote from Mall Cop. Articles from newspapers, other types of sources, these are the ones that get quotation marks. An article from a newspaper, a magazine, a journal on the internet, also chapters and individual episodes on plays, on TV shows and plays. Okay. Anybody have any questions? All right. Good. Anybody have any questions about the papers? All right. Anybody have any questions or comments about anything else? All righty. We're all either in.
Oh wait, I do have one question. You were saying that we should email you about our topic.
If it's other than one of the ones I proposed.
Okay, so if we're just picking one of the ones you proposed, we just write it.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I won't, but it's only if you come up with a topic that I wasn't expecting, just so I'm prepared and I want to talk it over with you. I'm always open to students coming up with their own topics if there's something you want to write about, but I just want to, chat about it.
No, is our own topic still on the books that we read, or is our own topic like anything relating to the class?
The books. Thank you.
Okay.
For asking that question, Daniel. Yes, these first papers, I want these to be limited to these texts. I want to make sure that we're reading closely.
All right, cool.
The next papers are going to be, these are interpretive papers where I want to see that you're interpreting, paying attention to the text, you're interpreting the text faithfully. And understanding the text, obviously, and understanding the author. The next set of papers in about a month are argumentative papers. So I'll invite you to engage critically with one of the authors. And then the final paper is research paper, which is going to be you branching out into your own topic of interest. Anybody have any other questions? All right, how is everything okay with the readings and the reading responses so far? All good? Good. Okay. Please keep me alerted to any issues, okay? I think that today's reading was probably pretty manageable for you all. The Ta-Nehisi Coates article coming from the Atlantic. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. I want to get into this essay. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. I do want to spend a few minutes talking about it because it's really, really important. This little article, it's written in the New York Times in 1970. And it sets us up for the book we'll be reading in 2 weeks by Mariana Mazzucato. Let me open up the chat here so I have somewhere to type. If you're able to, please pull it up off of Canvas. I'm gonna reference it at least once or twice, and hopefully by looking in at the text itself. But I'm gonna put the title here in the chat so we can just reference that. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. This is the title. That's the title. How does that title strike you?
It sounds cruel.
Why?
Because it's basically just saying that they have no obligation to care about anyone except money. Which he has a point. It just sounds really cruel.
Sean.
It sounds a little oxymoronic to me, because how can you have a social responsibility to a private enterprise?
Okay. You're sounding a little more like Friedman there. Anybody else? How do companies today feel about social responsibility? Is this important, Jessica?
I believe it's a marketing tactic.
Can you think of any companies that tout their social responsibility?
Indeed.
Can you think of any companies that don't? That's probably the better question, right?
Chick-fil-A
Chick-fil-A, what's their social responsibility?
to serve white Christians chicken.
And to not be open on Sundays.
Okay.
Or maybe not to serve white Christians chicken because they're not going to be there on Sunday.
Okay. All right.
It's pretty good chicken though.
It is. It's
It is very good.
you all need to see the who's the comedian from Parks and Recreation who does a joke about that.
Ron Swanson.
No, he's Aziz Ansari. He has a very funny joke where he's deliberating what to do about Chick-fil-A. Anyway, how about some more progressive examples? Businesses, can you think of any businesses that are committed to social responsibility?
Are we counting nonprofits?
No, don't you dare.
There's a lot of quote unquote sustainable clothing brands that make however they view sustainability as a big part of their marketing.
Right.
Specifically in women's clothing, I guess maybe that's because it's what I shop for, but I can think of so many off the top of my head, like Reformation, Everlane, Girlfriend Collective. There's so many.
Cool. I don't know any of those. Air mentioned Starbucks. That's more up my alley. I know Starbucks.
I can think of the household product brand Seventh Generation, that their entire brand is about being good for the environment and donating their profits to certain causes.
I use that brand, and I just want to say that is the quickest I've ever ran out of paper towels in my entire life. And I think it's a really good thing to bring up because it's just supposed to be sustainable. It's using recycled things. It has a good cause, but also it is such a garbage product that I'm using so much more material than I would have otherwise. So I don't know if it's a great solution.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. A lot of it is simply marketing. It's not actually doing a lot of good.
I have to introduce
sure.
you all to something called the Jevons paradox. Jevons was an English economist at the turn of the previous century, and he basically noticed that when you try to products that are more sustainable actually lead to more consumption in some ways. That's what you're talking about there. We see this also in electric cars. I wrote about this a few years ago in Sweden. They've had a big transition to electric cars, and because cars are so much more fuel efficient, Swedish people started to drive more. So that the carbon footprint of the whole country actually grew. But anyway, that's a complicating factor. Just a fun fact to tuck into your wallet for someday. You want to seem cool at a cocktail party. Method. I know that one. I buy that at Target sometimes. Patagonia. Oh, Teresa. That's fucking awesome, right? Patagonia had an ad last year. It's like, don't buy this jacket. Guess what? I wanted to buy it. Do you ever see that ad? It said, do not buy this jacket. What's up with that? Goodwill. Jennifer, Goodwill is
Does Tesla count?
it's a charity. Yeah, well, of course. Tesla. Why, do they have a conscience? Does Elon Musk have a conscience?
I don't know. He seems more business oriented.
By the way, I didn't know Goodwill was.
They do make good cars.
Sorry, I cut you off about Tesla.
I said Elon Musk's more business oriented with his other products and companies like Boring, SpaceX, but they do make fine products.
Okay, good. I guess the cause they would be principally committed to is sustainability. Although, yeah, anyway, good. Rachel.
My thoughts go towards soda companies and the more recent
Nice.
like balance your life kind of thing. If you're drinking our soda, go outside and eat healthy with it. The balance idea, even though the entire thing is just a corporation that exists as syrup and water. And I had to read this Coca-Cola capitalism book last semester for social history of commerce, and I just hate soda so much, but I still
What was that book?
Citizen Coke.
Oh, cool. That sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, Coke, give the world a smile or whatever. I can't remember. Right. Kendall Jenner solves racism. Well, thank God. It's about time. What has she been doing all this time? Gillette ad, Sean, not helpful. You have to tell us what it is. Which ad is that?
There was like an ad, I forget, it was like 2019 or maybe early 2020, and it was like this ad that Gillette ran where it was just like a bunch of dudes who were just like holding each other back from being dicks to women, and everyone was just like, what does this have to do with shaving?
Thank you. I don't remember that one. But how about Dove? Remember Dove soap, the campaign body affirmative? Boy, I guess you all probably know Athleta, right? Athleta is an offshoot of the Gap. They make Athleta wear. And I was in Towson the other day, heading to the grocery store, and Athleta is next to the grocery store, and they are taking the Dove approach. They have women of all shapes and sizes now that they are trying to tout. That this is who they, this is, this idea of body affirmation. Companies during Pride Month, Teresa points out, what is that? When is that?
When it is Pride Month?
Yeah. You mean Gay Pride Month?
Yeah. It's just like every time during Pride Month, all of a sudden companies have a lot of rainbow merchandise that they all of a sudden want to sell, usually
Yeah.
either just for profit or a very small charitable donation.
I've noticed in the bank lately, at Bank of America and M&T, the very conspicuous ads of gay couples getting a mortgage, Lamborghini? What? Who? Gabe? You got to explain yourself there. Hello? Is Gabe out there? Gabe dropped Lamborghini. I don't know if they're into any kind of charity at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know their motto's really weird.
What is it? Do you know?
Well, they don't pay for advertisement at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know word by word, but they say
word of mouth, it's called.
Yeah. It's our customers aren't watching TV or something like that. I don't know.
Right. Sydney points out Abercrombie and Fitch is the opposite of Athleta. I've always suspected it. Anyway, you get the picture. It is not conceivable that a company would not project some kind of social responsibility, right? Today, that is taken for granted, if not through overt branding, endorsing specific causes, being synonymous, Patagonia is synonymous with sustainability, right? Various other, a few years ago, BP, the oil firm, tried to do this because they turned their motto green and then they made the BP look like a little tree, and even while they were being awful, that was right around the time of their own oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico about 10 years ago. Microsoft, I'm thinking, I Branton, what do you think? How does Microsoft do that?
I'm sorry. Well,
Get some of
going from
mine.
what they've stated before is that they tend to donate a lot to charitable causes. So
Gotcha.
so you count it as one.
Gotcha. When I think of tech firms, I think of Apple. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, not long ago, they had a campaign called Think Different, where they're like, it was like MLK and Einstein. What does that have to do with an Apple? I don't know, and nowadays there's a recent campaign for Apple that is marketed towards you all artists, where I think I saw it even during the Super Bowl. It's like Spike Lee is holding an apple, and all these people are like formally on the outside because they thought too differently. They're the people who go with Apple. And I'm happy to see you all have a healthy cynicism about all this.
Isn't a lot of the donating used for tax write-offs and like
Yes.
other, because I see there's a lot of times where you could donate spare change, and I choose to never do that because it like makes my whole purchase, I think, classified as like a donation or something, and they're able to like circumvent paying more money elsewhere. Is that true? I don't remember.
I don't know about the details of what you're talking about, but in general, yes, these are called tax write-offs. They get that benefit. Any other thoughts about why companies do this?
Brand friendly.
What does that mean?
It means that people feel happier about supporting a company if they think that they're nice people, even if they actually aren't.
Good.
Well, it's all just like PR, right?
Is it?
I mean, if you're just going out there and doing good things for the sake of, getting more money, then that's just PR and they're really good at it.
Okay. I'm just fishing around to see if we're all totally cynical. There isn't some more generous angle here.
I think, if we are being more generous, you could just say that sometimes the people who are in charge of those brands have a similar background to their target consumer. So if they support causes or support social issues that matter to that consumer, then they'll identify more with the brand. So it's still obviously a brand's not really going to do something that isn't net positive for them, but it could also just be aligning with their interests.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Chloe. I guess the only one I have a question about is Patagonia, right? Don't buy this coat. Is that not the most curious, counterintuitive ad?
Patagonia also have, I've been in an in-person Patagonia store only one time, but they had a station set up where you could bring Patagonia clothes, or I think also other clothes you had bought, and they would mend them on the spot for you in the store where you could buy other Patagonia clothes, which was very interesting to me.
Yeah. All right. Hang on, Jesse has his hand up, and then we'll go there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how in another class of mine, we were learning about kind of marketing and advertising and how that's changed over time. And around the 1980s, ads and marketing stopped focusing as much on the product and what they were selling and started focusing more on a brand identity and kind of coding a feeling more so than anything else. When you think of Coke, very few ads for Coke are going to tell you that Coke tastes delicious. It's going to show you this experience, the Coke experience, and this Patagonia ad arguably is selling not saying that you shouldn't buy our coats. It's saying that, we have the same social values as you, so you should support us as a brand. And you don't necessarily have to buy this coat, but the next time you do need a coat, you'll know where to go.
Yeah. I think you're talking about Naomi Klein's No Logo.
That's correct. Yes.
What class is that in?
Open source revolution.
This is one of my favorite books of all time. I used to teach this book in this class many years ago. Highly recommend it. I don't know if you've heard of Naomi Klein. She's become very popular activist and author in the last few years. She writes for The Nation. Naomi Klein, I taught it because I thought it'd be especially of interest to graphic design students. It's about the early days of branding and how it is interwoven with globalization. And this actually ties in pretty nicely with the article by Friedman, because what she argues is that what the revolution in branding did is that companies stopped being about products, right? You might think that one of the things she says is, right, you might think that the Gap, what does the Gap make? You might think the Gap makes clothes. Well, the Gap doesn't make shit, because everything is outsourced to subcontractors in Asia. What they make at the Gap is an idea. And that idea is whatever the brand is. So as Jesse points out, when you buy a Coke, you're not buying hydration, you're buying like energy and freedom, shit like that. And she points out that the budgets for, thanks to globalization, production was outsourced, and the budget for advertising exploded. And that's what companies become about. Companies become about creating an idea or a brand. So if that sounds of interest to anybody, get that book. It's awesome and it's well written. Good. Well, let's pull this apart, this essay by Friedman here. Good. So today, it's kind of taken for granted that companies have to have a social conscience, or at least project a social conscience, for a variety of reasons. And we'll talk about this, why things changed. In 1970, he writes this essay. He says, he's kind of peeing on the party. He's like, nope, shouldn't have any. Make money. And the question is, why? His argumentation from a purely logical standpoint, it's pretty solid, actually. I think the thing at the end of the day, you have to question his premises. But the argument itself makes sense. Anybody know why he insists that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits? Why? Or let me flip it. Why shouldn't CEOs be invested in social causes? I'm going to open with the most important question. Who owns a corporation?
The stockholders.
Bingo. Stockholders. Also known as the shareholders. They are the owners. We're talking here, everybody, about public companies. Okay? Public companies. When, maybe you've heard of an IPO. Anybody heard of an IPO? It's called an initial public offering. Anybody know which companies had an IPO recently?
Bumble.
Bumble. What's Bumble? I've heard of Bumble.
It's this online dating platform where women, send a first message.
Wait, what's the business model?
What do you mean?
I mean, what's unique? There's a lot of dating sites.
Women message first.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Women powered. Women. Good. Bumble went public. Last year, Uber, or 2 years ago, Uber went public. When a company goes public, everybody, this means that they are going to sell stock on the stock market. And this is a method, this is a means of raising money. At a certain point, a company, so if you're talking about startups in Silicon Valley, they get what is called venture capital from a couple rich people, right? And then that sustains them for a while. And then they decide, you know what, we have a good product here. I'm going to talk about something that we can easily discuss. So let's talk about it like a hamburger restaurant. Oh, that's nothing Silicon Valley ever funds. But at a certain point, the company realizes that it wants to expand. And in order to expand, and then thereby expand its market share, maybe it wants to build restaurants in a growing number of states, it needs to raise money. How does it raise money? It raises money by going public. It raises money by selling shares of the corporation on Wall Street. And then you can buy some, your parents, your grandma, a pension fund, my retirement fund. And then, of course, the guy who created the firm, he or she will keep a certain portion, but they may become what's called a majority owner, but they may only own like 20%. So, for example, I'd be curious to see how much of Tesla Mr. Elon Musk owns. I don't know what percentage is, but you could find it. Okay. When a company goes public, that means it is owned by the shareholders. What do shareholders want? They want profit. So when a CEO, Friedman argues, when a CEO takes it upon himself to plant trees, blah, blah, wherever, to be green, to fight child hunger, to promote racial injustice. By the way, we didn't even get to Nike. How about Nike with Colin Kaepernick, right? He says when a CEO does that, thank you, Evan. When a CEO does that, he said a CEO is effectively making a political decision for its shareholders. What if you're a Republican shareholder of Nike and you don't care about racial injustice, or you don't like Black Lives Matter? This CEO is making decisions for you, and that is not correct. It turns out in our democratic society, we have special people chosen to advance public policy issues. They are called politicians. They are elected. CEOs are not elected to do political business. They're elected to make money for their shareholders. End of fucking story. Okay? So he says it's almost like taxation without representation, which was the base of which was the rallying cry of the American Revolution. It's also the rallying cry of Washington, D.C., by the way. I don't know if you've ever seen their kind of sad license plates. You guys seen the license plates that in Washington, D.C., they say taxation without representation because they don't have a congressperson, but they're taxed. So I'm waiting for rebellion any day now. And so, the idea that a business should have a social conscience contravenes our very own democratic principles. Just imagine. Whew, that's quite a claim right there. Okay. But the other point is the CEO, it's only fair that the CEO makes decisions in the interest of the owners and doesn't go renegade and run off on his own. And the one interest that all the shareholders have in common, of all political stripes, the one thing they have in common is they want to make money. Therefore, Mr. CEO, shut up and make money. All right. I think I've delivered much of it right there. Questions? I have more to say, but I'm pausing. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Well, going off of that, it would seem
you-
it would seem like all of the companies now, I mean, it's kind of obvious, all the companies now that claim to have any sort of social responsibility, it's because they know that that's what will get them more money, because they know that people nowadays care more about these causes. And so it's all just a facade.
There are two big issues in here that he never anticipated. I'm going to talk about one in a minute. But the first one is what you just mentioned. He never anticipated that having a social cause is good for business, right? If you don't like Black Lives Matter and you have invested in Nike and they're starting to roll in the dough because of Colin Kaepernick, I guess that meets your needs, right? Somebody else? There was somebody else starting to pipe up. Questions, comments, issues? Okay. All right. If a corporation is devoted to increasing profits, if that's what it's all about, what is left out of that definition? If a corporation is all about increasing profits for the shareholders, what is left out? Conscience. Yeah. There's something else missing. The customer. Anybody else? The Gap, Coca-Cola, Toyota, their purpose is to make profits for their shareholders. What's left out?
The employees.
Yes. They weren't part of the equation before, though. There is a difference here. It's related to the difference that Jesse was talking about with Naomi Klein. There is a difference here. In the 60s and before, companies, like what is Ford about? What is GM about? What's Chrysler about, right? Is their definition to make profits for the shareholders? It's about, I think they would have said it's about production, right? Notice it's kind of subtle here, right? But this, and absolutely the employees left out, but the employee wasn't really part of the, was already on the outs prior to this. A company, so what we see here, this is very important, everybody. What we see here, thanks to this essay, this essay is the primary articulation of something called shareholder theory. And it's the shareholder theory of corporate governance, okay? And it is contrasted with something called the stakeholder. Now, I know this is going to be a little bit, oh, and I misspelled stake, excuse me, stakeholder theory. These two things, I know they're very similar, but a shareholder theory is the idea that a company exists for the sake of expanding corporate, stock share prices. And so then CEOs and corporate boards start to think about the kinds of things that can increase share price. And it leads to all kinds of fishy behavior. It turns out that one of the things that corporations can do to initially and immediately spike their share price is to cut employees. When you reduce your staff, this signals to Wall Street that you're focusing on greater efficiency and stock prices go up. So share price is always rewarded when you trim your payroll, okay? Another thing that companies do, we saw this in the last year. Well, actually, we saw this with the tax breaks initiated by President Trump a few years ago. A lot of companies, their tax bracket was lowered. They made a lot of savings. And the Republican argument was this is going to be used to expand employment, right? This is, we haven't really talked about it in this class, everybody, but I think you all know about this. It's called trickle-down theory. You all know trickle-down theory. The idea of trickle-down theory is that if you reward the capitalists, the wealthy, or the employers, or the corporations, they have more money to hire more people to put you to work, right? So don't punish The rich guy who can buy a yacht, he's going to employ 6 people who have built that yacht, and then 3 more to keep it in shape. You know what I mean? And then those 3 more, they can buy some motorcycles or cars, and they put more people to work. So it trickles down. Well, after the tax breaks from President Trump in 2018, I think it was, a lot of companies had a windfall of cash, and the expectation was they would use that money to hire more people and to expand production. Nope, didn't do that at all. They did something, most companies did something called a share buyback. According to the economic rules of supply and demand, they took that cash, started buying their own stock, and in buying their own stock, bid the price of that stock upwards. So a lot of people were critical of this. The point being, this, we live in an age where shareholder theory has dominated, and the corporations are obsessed with doing all they can to improve the lot of their shareholders. Okay. And that it means all kinds of nasty little behavior like this. They don't care about production anymore. They outsource production. Gap has its jeans made in Vietnam. They make oodles of savings. They don't care about the conditions under which those pants are made, right? And so on. So this is a sticking point. Stakeholder theory is different. Stakeholder theory is a competitor to shareholder theory that has come about in the last 15 years. The argument being that, corporations should be run not only for shareholders, but for other stakeholders, other parties that have a stake in the health of that company, chief among which are employees. What about them? Or how about the city or the neighborhood or state in which corporation is based, right? Like Apple, based in California. We've discovered now they've been keeping a lot of their profits in Ireland. That way they don't have to pay taxes back at home, right? That has a great impact on Cupertino, where they're based, right? Other stakeholders, the government, the local government, like in California, Cupertino is missing out a ton of revenue here that could be used to improve the streets, the safety, all kind of infrastructure. So these are the various stakeholders. And so the argument for stakeholder theory is that a government should be run in the interest of the various stakeholders. Customers, I think, can also be counted among this. Okay. I'm going to pause for a second. Anybody have any questions? I want to look at one thing here in this, the very conclusion, and then we can move on. Okay. So I'm going to look here at, this is the conclusion. I'm looking at this sentence here at the very end. This sums it up very well. He says, this is why in my book, Capitalism and Freedom, I have called it a fundamentally subversive doctrine. It's subversive in a free society to say that companies should have a conscience. This is a subversive doctrine, and have said that in such society, there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. Okay? There is your conclusion. Make as much profit as you can within the rules of the game. There is another problem you didn't anticipate, and it's kind of hidden in that last conclusion. Does anybody know what it is?
Well, they're not engaging in the rules of the game anymore.
They're not.
Or they're not playing by the rules of the game.
What is the relationship of corporations to the rules of the game? By rules of the game, everybody, we're talking about laws, like pollution laws. What is the relationship between corporations and like pollution laws?
Well,
They lobby so that the politicians change the laws in their favor.
Thank you. Lobbies. One thing he ignores for whatever reason is that corporations, they can influence and change the rules of the game. Okay. And that's exactly what they've done in the last few years, right? If you looked at the article I sent you last week about Scott Pruitt, who ran the EPA under Trump, he came from the oil industry, right? Thanks to him, he changed the rules of what constitutes pollution. Oh, well, suddenly many oil companies, turns out they weren't polluting at all, right? Wasn't that convenient? Okay, listen up. See, lobbying, this is not something I had prepared today, but I should share this with you next week. Lobbying, another fabulous topic I'm so interested in because there are so many lobbies. Let me see. Who knows some of these lobbies? I'm going to start with the big one. Just get out of the way. NRA. You know the NRA, right? Anybody know any other lobbies? Hobby Lobby is not one. Hallmark has a political lobby. Of course they do.
Is PETA a lobby?
PETA? That's a good question. I don't know. Well, I don't expect you all to know names of lobbies. I kind of cheated. I took the one everybody could name. The question is this, is actually this. It's not even a question. I'm just going to tell you. If you can think of an industry, it has a fucking lobby. That's all there is to it. Greeting cards, lobby. A few years ago, I read some fascinating things about frozen foods. They have a lobby. The Frozen Food Manufacturers of America, big lobby. They make frozen. There's people who make frozen pizza, frozen French fries. What do you think they might be lobbying about? Frozen pizzas, French fries, bring back memories. High school cafeteria memories. They are lobbying the education. They're lobbying schools to get into your cafeteria. You know, the food pyramid, that's lobbied right there. When I was your age or just younger, your parents will know this, under the Reagan administration, the government decreed that tomato sauce is a vegetable. Well, thank God. Suddenly pizza has a vegetable. I noticed my kids' cafeteria, public school, they have this little like wheat symbol to show when the kids are getting grains. And for lunch one day, they had hot dogs and there was a wheat symbol next to them. I'm like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Wheat. Well, the bun. Right? How does a hot dog bun get a wheat symbol? Okay. Lobbies. Slushies counted as fruit. You can thank a lobby for that. The biggest lobby, pharmaceuticals, huge lobby, massive. The banks, Wall Street banks have a massive lobby. The real estate industry has a lobby. The beef industry has a big lobby. They got into a big fight with Oprah a few years ago. You name it. Every industry has a lobby, and they influence the rules. And in order to stay within the rules. So this is not something that I think he could have ever. I'm not sure why he didn't anticipate it. But what I wanted to say is this: that you can see this, and I'll share this with you later. Lobbying expenditures have just skyrocketed since 1970. That's really when it began. And he didn't see that coming. In addition to the point that he didn't see coming was, you know, how marketing a social conscience is good for business. All right. Questions, comments, complaints, objections?
Wait,
Go for it.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I wasn't gonna say anything important. You can go.
Oh, I was just gonna say, didn't he didn't predict like the marketing thing, but didn't he say something about how like with charitable donations and how that creates like tax breaks and kind of he kind of create a relationship between that and like a acceptable form of corruption or something. I don't remember exactly,
Well,
but
it's funny. He doesn't mention it in this article. And I think his position would be that he is against that deduction, right? He thinks that should not be a deduction. Because as long as that deduction is there, there's a temptation to muddy the waters. And what he doesn't want us to muddy the waters. CEOs must have their eye on the prize. One thing, increase profits. End of story, right? Thank you. Anybody else? Or Daniel, did you want to chime in now?
Well, I was just, I think, a little bit confused. Are you saying that the people not in the equation are the lobbyists and like?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't anticipate that change, or he certainly doesn't reveal that he anticipates it, because it's naive to say that they increase their profits within the rules of the game, when what we've seen in the last 50 years is that companies devote a ton of money to doing just that, changing the rules.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems kind of messed up when you can do that, because then you're not really working within the profit system or like the social responsibility system. You're kind of just freewheeling it and making a bunch of money.
Let's be clear, it defies the free market. And he's all about the free market. So he would be very critical of lobbies. Lobbies are not cool, okay? Because they abuse and morph the market in ways that we can talk about. And I think we did talk about last week, like the corn lobby got that ethanol business going, and that was not cool. Jesse.
I was just thinking about how there was some point, I was trying to find it in my notes in the article, but I can't really find it, where he just talks about how, CEOs basically failed to get the public to accept whatever will they're trying to project in terms of social responsibility. And that's why it's kind of undemocratic of them to, enact whatever will they want. But couldn't he or anyone argue that lobbying is just them putting money and energy into changing the will of the people to the point where it's acceptable to do that?
Well, see, this is how businesses look at it. I mean, I was talking about this the other day with a friend of mine. He teaches at Hopkins. He's also teaching this essay. We were criticizing it and saying that, like, this has become, businesses now corporations see this now as the cost of doing business. You must lobby. And banks, I mean, the kind of money that the banking lobby showers on Congress is astronomical. It's just astronomical. However, when you compare it to the profits of JP Morgan, it's minuscule. It's just the cost of doing business. It's just one more thing you have to do, right? So, I don't know. This has become a big problem. I said that to my friend from Hopkins. I was like, this is so clever of me. Take a look at the conclusion. And he didn't anticipate lobbies. And my friend said, well, you're right. But, I think what Friedman would say is, when government becomes so big, don't forget that's his complaint. When government becomes so big and, inserts itself so strongly in the economy at various places, then lobbies are inevitable, because businesses will feel that they have to ply the government. So you could see this as an argument for reducing. The argument against lobbies could also be an argument for reducing the breadth and the scope and the invasiveness of government, or the expansive government intervention. If the government has a very low profile in the economy, why lobby, right? But when government is buying food to feed millions of school children, yeah, yeah, then you're going to lobby like you should buy my frozen pizza, and tomato sauce is a vegetable. Come on, play ball, And now we're at a stage where politicians have to raise astronomical amounts of money just to run. They spend, most of their time in office raising money. Lobbies make it very easy, right? Daniel asked me directly, if you don't mind, you want me to share that with the class, Daniel? I'm going to do it anyway. Have there been movements to rescind some of the negative effects of lobbies, or do lobbies stay in place to donate to and pay off politicians to ensure policies persist? It's funny, I asked my friend that the other day. He's the chair of poli sci at Hopkins, and especially his farm politics. We were discussing about 20 years ago, there was an initiative in Congress, the McCain-Feingold bill, named after John McCain, and Feingold was a senator from Wisconsin at the time, about campaign finance reform. And that's the last I've heard of campaign finance reform. It just becomes so hard. The problem is these lobbies kind of have our politicians by the what. You need a ton of money just to stay in office, so you're reliant on the money from these corporations, from these lobbies. Right? Hello, someone speaking. Diamond, you want to join in? All right. So, it's hard. And by the way, I guess you guys have all heard of, I hope you've heard of Citizens United, which was the Supreme Court, no worries, Diamond, which was the Supreme Court decision about 10 years ago, which said that money is speech, right? And that corporations could spend an unlimited amount of money because it's like you can't limit speech on the political system. But as long as they do that, these politicians need a ton of money just to compete with one another, right? I don't know if you guys heard, but this last presidential election was the most expensive presidential election ever, right? And these were fun. Diamond, you need to go on mute.
I don't know why.
Diamond, you need to go on mute. All right, I can mute her. Go ahead, Desi.
Is it going too far to say, because I've thought this for a long time, that like we aren't even really represented by our politicians anymore? Like, I think taxation without representation kind of applies again, because now it's the companies that get to decide what laws are made, and it kind of doesn't matter what we have to say anymore, because we're not the ones giving them, like, they care more about the money now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My wife's best friend is a Congress, just got a position here, Baltimore County local government, and we were having a conversation with her the other day. And she just won last year, but she's already being criticized by the Democratic Party for not raising enough money. There was a congressman just last year who, there were a couple in the last year who, I forget their names. The one guy in particular stands out, but he retired saying, listen, I have to spend half my time in office on the phone raising money. That's not why I became a politician, right? But this is the name of the game. You can't run for office with $50,000 if your competitor has 100 million. You have to raise 100 million just to get heard, right? So, money, the corporations and the lobbies are happy to feed cash into this system because it's like an arms race, right? The politicians just have to outraise each other at every step of the game. But this takes them away then again from legislating. Olivia says, could it be said that corporations are as opposed to government are what run America? I think it's very when President Obama, big example I always like to share, when he did the Affordable Care Act a few years ago, the law was written by the health insurance company, the lobby. They wrote the law. He just signed it. And this happens all the time, right? These lobbies, they hire lawyers and people from government. They call this the revolving door, right? You leave office, you get hired by a firm to then ply your previous colleagues, and they write bills and they say to a congressperson, right, we'll give you this money. Sorry, well, yeah, you'll be the recipient of these funds, and here's the bill we want you to enact, right? They literally write legislation. And one of the problems at the Supreme Court, this came up in the Citizens United decision, is there was a debate over the definition of corruption, right? And basically, Justice Kennedy said, this is not corruption. It's not corruption. And they said it's not corruption because you don't see a quid pro quo, right? I give you money, you play ball, right? Like in Maryland, I don't know. Well, if you're a senator from Texas, you have to enact measures that are friendly to the oil industry, right? But it's not a quid pro quo, because you don't see quid pro quo as Latin, which I should know because I took Latin 20 years ago. It means literally this for that. You need an exact trail, right? When Senator Cruz enacts this legislation, he needs to say, and thank you, Exxon, right? Well, no, he's never going to say that, but you see effective quid pro quos in the way they behave, right? Chuck Schumer from New York is always going to endorse legislation that is favorable to Wall Street banks because they're the big donor in New York. Is it a quid pro quo? It is for all intents and purposes. It's just you don't have the exact evidence, right? I don't know exactly what burden of proof, that's the legal term, Senator Kennedy would be looking for, but a lot of people were irate. Actually, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was irate. So if you're interested in looking at this further, read her minority opinion to the Citizens United, whoever wrote it. I don't know who wrote the minority opinion. Anybody else? Good. Ajit Pai. Who is that, Evan? Name rings a bell.
He was the chairman of the FCC, and he was the deciding vote to end net neutrality because he was basically owned by like Verizon.
Yeah. The Trump administration was the most egregious ever, where you saw people from the industry dominate these agencies. I mean, just imagine a guy from the oil industry was the head of the EPA. I had never seen anything like that in my life, and so, yeah, corporate interests were at the fore. Good. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I'm going to move over to this essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates now, and I imagine we'll get into it, and then I think next week we'll probably expand further. And I did find, and so because I have to tell you something, guys, at 5:40 I have to go. So we'll get a start here and see how far we go with this. And I did have plans to break us all out into discussions, but my plans are always, like in groups of 3 or 4, my plans always, they get upended by other things. Anyway, this has all been very valuable. You all need to talk about lobbies. You really do, and corruption. And shareholder theory. Now you know shareholder theory. For Mariana Mazzucato, this would be hugely important. So good. This essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates was written in the Atlantic in 2014, I believe. And I think it was 2014. And it really was a sensation. Oh, wait, maybe it's 2016. Anyway, it really was a sensation. I was always surprised that it was not expanded into a book. I was all ready to teach the book if it ever came out. There are other books that have expanded on these themes. So if you're interested, they're available. Ta-Nehisi Coates, turns out, is from Baltimore. And he comes here often. I've seen him speak before. He's a great speaker. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I'll just open it up and see if you guys had any general comments or questions about this article. Or how did it read? Did this read well? Yeah. I got one thumbs up.
I thought he was a phenomenal writer. I blew right through it, and I thought it was really interesting the way he like threaded the story of these people throughout the entire article. So it kept bringing me back to the same ideas. Like he would introduce something new and then apply it to this person.
Yeah.
Or, there's a couple different ones, but yeah.
Good. Anybody else? Any other general comments or observations? Well, let's start right off the bat with one of the key issues here, which is he focuses on this guy, Clyde Ross, who moves to Chicago and buys a house in, I believe, the 1950s. And he buys the house. The nature of this purchase is similar to how African Americans were buying houses throughout neighborhoods in Chicago and Baltimore and many cities. What was unique about the contract that many African Americans were being forced into? Sean?
They didn't actually buy the house.
Right.
They were basically just renting, except they didn't have any of the protections of a renter.
Good. Yeah. He sums it up here in the middle of page 8. I hope my pages match onto yours. This is where he discusses specifically the terms of the contract for Clyde Ross. He says he had bought, it's called buying on contract. He had bought on contract in quotation marks, a predatory agreement that combined all the responsibilities of homeownership with the disadvantages of renting. While offering the benefits of neither, Ross had bought his house for $27,500. The seller, not the previous homeowner, but a new kind of middleman, had bought it for only $12,000 6 months earlier, 6 months before selling it to Ross. In a contract sale, the seller kept the deed until the contract was paid in full. And unlike with a normal mortgage, Ross would acquire no equity. In the meantime, if he missed a single payment, he would immediately forfeit his $1,000 down payment, all his monthly payments, and the property itself. A couple terms in here, everybody. A deed, sometimes referred to as the title. When you own something, when you own a car or a house, you have the title. That's the proof of ownership. In a traditional mortgage, when you buy a house or when you buy a car on a car loan, you are given the title and it is signed over to you and it is proven that you are the owner. Essentially, what was happening here is that African American people were buying these houses without receiving the deed in return, which, Sean, you described it accurately. They were not actually owning it. It is, for all intents and purposes, it is renter, is they're renting. And the key term here I want you all to pay attention to is they acquired no equity. Do you guys know what that term equity means here? Sean?
Isn't that like the profit you generate when an asset you own rises in value?
Close. Well, yes, but let's talk in the realm. You're talking about a different realm. Let's limit ourselves to the realm of home ownership. Anybody know what equity means in the realm of home ownership? If you build up equity in your home.
Is it like when you make like renovations or have like expensive things in the home?
Yes. Basically, equity refers to the part that you own. Okay, so when you buy a house, you have a down payment. Nowadays, it is 20%. That's mandated by law. Okay, since the Dodd-Frank bill 10 years ago, you got to put 20% down. You borrow the rest from the bank. 30-year mortgage, you're paying out a portion of this every month. Every payment includes two things: interest and principal. Interest, that's the interest rate. Like, so if your mortgage is 8%, well, that's actually high. Now they're more like 4. If it's 4%, your house is 350. Let's say your house is $350,000. What's 4% of 350? That's your interest. Add that on. Anybody do some quick math for me here? Because I don't have a calculator open. What's 4% of 350, y'all? Somebody bang it out.
14,000, I think.
You think? Don't you have a calculator app somewhere?
I'm doing it in my head to be impressive, okay?
That is, I am impressed. Actually.
It's 10,000.
It is?
Okay, it's not impressive anymore.
All right.
No, it's 14,000. And that if you do it on a calculator.
Oh, I wrote 250 instead of 350 by accident.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
My bad.
All right, Sean, you are vindicated. All right, so I'm gonna do the math for you here. 4% on 350. Well, actually, it's 4% on what you borrow. Shit, I'm getting into some bad business here, everybody. I'm talking about numbers and math with Micah students, and I wasn't prepared. You put down 20%. Oh, I know this. 20% of 350. I know what that is. Sean, 70,000. So 350 minus 70 equals 280, right? That's the amount that you're borrowing. We good now? 4% of that. Thank you. Another opportunity. Break out your calculators. What's 4% of 280?
11,200.
Boy, now we're getting precise. So this is the exact amount that you are borrowing from the bank on a house of 350 over 30 years. You can also go online and you can find a mortgage calculator, everybody, and put in that number and find out what your monthly payment is going to be. By the way, a bank will look at your finances and will only approve you for loans that it thinks you can pay. Okay. So 292, that's the full amount you're borrowing. Every month you're paying principal and interest. What does that mean? Part of your payment goes towards paying the 4% interest that Jesse pointed out. More importantly, your money needs to go towards principal, which is your ownership in the house. Okay, so you start off, your equity is 70K. That's your equity. 5 years later, let's say your equity is 120K. 10 years later, let's say it's 180K. Isn't that sweet? And I'm not even talking about appreciation. What if the neighborhood gets better and it goes up? Then whatever profit you made on the house, that's also your equity. Okay. What do you do with that equity? Well, Jesse pointed out we might want an addition. Maybe you'd like a hot tub. Maybe you'd like a pool. Maybe you need to send a kid to college. Here's the beauty of that equity. You can borrow money against it. This is called collateral. That's why equity is hugely important. Equity that people have in their homes is, in many cases, the most important asset that they have. A family builds up equity in their home by paying down that mortgage over the years. Then they borrow that money against that to maybe buy like an investment property somewhere to grow family wealth. Or maybe they borrow that money to put the kid through college, or they borrow money to buy a house for their children. So the very important point you need to notice is that African Americans were being locked out of this very basic wealth building mechanism. Jesse.
I'm just not entirely clear on what you mean by borrowing money against equity.
Anytime you want to borrow money, Jesse, you need collateral. You need to prove to the bank that you have ownership of something, right? Because if things go south, they'll take your collateral. Okay. So home equity, we call this home equity, is hugely important. you should all talk to your parents and your family members after class about this, right? Because this is how, if you want to do an addition on your home, or very often, I mean, I'm speaking from the vantage point of college educator, this is how a lot of families pay for college education, or at least they did for a long time. The collateral your portion of your home that you own, that is something that you can borrow money against. You can use as collateral to borrow things and then expand your wealth in a variety of different ways. It proves, in other words, it proves to be essential capital, is what I'm trying to say. Did I help? This is all very important. So you got to ask me questions. Anybody else?
So basically it's like considered a part of like your income. Like if you didn't have a house but you were trying to get a loan, they would base it off of like your income. And maybe if you own a car and don't have any payments on that car, that's considered an asset. So like if you have a house and you've paid off this amount of money, they include that in what they consider how wealthy they consider you to be.
It's quite literally an asset they could take if you can't pay anymore. But you've got to have it to borrow money. You've got to have it. And if you want to expand your wealth, you have to borrow money. You have to. And so African Americans were completely blocked out of the process. And this is the most important building block of expanding family wealth: the equity you own in your home. Okay? Other questions? So pretty soon, when you all graduate and get a job, you're going to have to stop renting. And the reason you're going to have to stop renting is because you're not getting any equity for your monthly payments. You're going to buy a house, save up some money, put 20% down, and then your monthly payments at that point are going to start to increase the portion of ownership in that residence that you have. Got it?
Do we have to?
I would recommend it. Because then you have something at the end of the day for all your ownership, right? Worst case scenario, crazy scenario, you rent a house for 30 years. If that were a mortgage, you would own that thing by the end of it all. So highly recommend it. Why did Clyde Ross sign this? This is called a predatory contract. You notice that there are predatory elements. What are the predatory elements? If he misses a single payment, he would immediately forfeit his down payment. He'd lose it and all his monthly payments, the whole dang thing. And he points out that a lot of these middlemen who would keep the deed, essentially continue to own the home, they would create all these various expenses that the homeowners at a certain point couldn't pay. So then they would default. And then they would take the property back, sell it, or as he says in the next paragraph, rinse and repeat, right? They would sell it again to the next person. And the question is, why were African Americans making these purchases? Because the short answer is they had no choice, right? They were exposed to these predatory loans because they were not protected by law. On the next page, he tells us here, this is very important, everybody, the efforts of these swindlers was buttressed by the federal government. In 1934, Congress created the FHA, the Federal, misspelled it, the Federal Home Housing Administration. The FHA insured private mortgages, causing a drop in interest rates and a decline in the size of the down payment required to buy a house. But an insured mortgage was not a possibility for Clyde Ross. The FHA had adopted a system of maps that rated neighborhoods according to their perceived stability. On the maps, green areas rated A indicated in-demand neighborhoods that, as one appraiser puts it, lacked a single foreigner or Negro. These neighborhoods were considered excellent prospects for insurance. Neighborhoods where Black people lived were rated D and were usually considered ineligible for FHA backing. They were colored in red. So maybe you've heard of the term. Anybody heard of the term redlining? This is it. This is where the term redlining comes from. And if you go on Google, you can find redlining maps of just about every city in America. I'm going to share with you the one in Baltimore. Baltimore is actually a famous case study of redlining. There was an awesome book written about it a few years ago called Not in My Neighborhood. Highly recommend it. Written by a former journalist with the Sun. But I do want to explain something here just for a second. I want to talk about mortgage. Oh, there you go, Rachel. Awesome
I'm
book.
actually about to start reading it for my race, space, and place class.
Oh, this is going
tomorrow.
to be awesome for you. I am jealous for the epiphany you're going to have. All right. I got to talk about mortgage insurance for a little bit, guys. A mortgage is bank lending you money to buy a house. Who do banks want to lend money to? Rich people or poor people?
Poor people.
No,
Rich people.
they want to lend to rich people. Why do they want to lend to rich people?
Because rich people can pay it back.
Exactly.
Unless we're in America in 2007.
Well, hang on to that thought. Let's go back to the idea that banks want to lend to rich people. They don't want to lend to poor people because poor people are a risk, right? So you have an inherent paradox to the mortgage industry. Where you need the money to go to, they're not inclined to do it. They're inclined to give it to the Steve Jobs of the world and the Bill Gates, the people who don't need it. So so the US government in the 1930s, this is the New Deal, by the way, guys, 1934, the US government wanted to expand home ownership among the middle class and the poor. How do you do that? How do you encourage banks to lend money to poor people and to lower middle class? You create federal housing administration that is going to insure mortgages. And what that basically does is it says to banks, you create this mortgage. If they fail it, we, the federal government, insures it. We will make you whole for it. And this was huge. Huge. So huge, he points out that home ownership in America went from 30 to 60% in about 30 years. It doubled. And you can see graphs indicating this. Home ownership skyrocketed for white people. Okay, hang on. When the government insures mortgages, that means banks are inclined to create more and to take risks with them. But the one area they were in, but then the government said, we're going to insure all of your mortgages except for neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. And so banks said, okay, then we're not lending there. And the government said, okay. And that was it. It was done. Right? So I'm going to share with you here. This is a map of Baltimore. This is a historic map of Baltimore. Guys, where's Micah? Micah's, I didn't pay close attention. We're somewhere here. Anyway, see the redlining. And by the way, these different colors are the different desirability of the more of neighborhoods to lend to, A, B, C, and D. And the red neighborhoods are African-American neighborhoods predominantly. And the yellow ones are perceived at-risk neighborhoods. And these are the neighborhoods, and I believe the green ones are the desirable ones. They indicate in Baltimore, that would be Roland Park and the area around Hopkins. And, these areas were barred to banks that, if you lived in that streets, you were not going to be able to buy there. And of course, if you were Black, they wouldn't sell you a home in the white neighborhood. So you had to gravitate towards that neighborhood. This is a cleaner way of how this looks, right? Redlined. So the bank deemed these areas hazardous. These are called definitely declining. That's all of West Baltimore. That's Pimlico. This is East Baltimore around Hopkins. Desirable, and then best. Anybody have any questions?
This graph alone explains white flight.
Yeah. the banks essentially, this is the point that Ta-Nehisi Coates goes on to make, is that the banks themselves, they effectively caused white flight, or the federal government did, because, yeah, if the home, think of it this way, is your most important asset, and the government has said that if you live near Black people, your home value will decline, yeah, you better leave, right? The government gives you little choice. There was that very tragic quote by that about, I think it was Levittown, this family in Levittown. I don't know if you guys know the one I'm talking about, where anybody know the quote I'm talking about? Levittown is one of these newer, well, not newer, in the 50s, it was a model suburb built outside of New York on Long Island. I had an aunt who lived there. These were like little cookie cutter homes. And the neighborhood covenants barred Black people from moving in. And he has this terrible quote about a family, these people talking about this Black people that wanted to move in to the neighborhood, and said, well, I'm sure these Black people are very nice, but every time I see them, I feel the value of my home diminished by $2,000, right? Thanks to government efforts. Right. Good. So a few more things here. And like I said, if you're interested, it turns out that there are a ton of other cities whose redlining maps are indicated. Chicago's, of course, is easily available. Now, here's the irony. The FHA program is credited with creating tremendous wealth for the middle class, but it was only for white people, okay? The period after the wars and the programs initiated by the New Deal, they were tremendous for the growth of the middle class in America, but Blacks were kept out. Here's a nice quote on page 11. He says, locked out of the greatest mass-based opportunity for wealth accumulation in American history, African Americans who desired and were able to afford home ownership found themselves consigned to central city communities where their investments were affected by the self-fulfilling prophecies of the FHA. These were called self-fulfilling prophecies, right? By saying that these neighborhoods were undesirable, then they certainly were. Cut off from sources of new investment, the African American community was, their homes and communities deteriorated and lost value in comparison to those homes and communities that FHA appraisers deemed desirable, right? And this was the case until just about, I believe, somewhere in the 1960s, this held sway. But he writes that the damage had been done. The damage had been done. The FHA had already started a spiral whereby these neighborhoods sunk. And African Americans and the African American community as a whole in America didn't have the same kind of, ownership, the same kind of capital that it could build, which leads to this kind of startling conclusion here, or the results now we see on page 17. And I'll read this quote here, reference, and then we'll break for the day. Towards the top of the page, Patrick Sharkey, a sociologist at NYU, studied children born from 1955 through 1970 and found that 4% of whites and 62% of Blacks across America had been raised in poor neighborhoods. A generation later, the same study showed virtually nothing had changed because the wealth in African American neighborhoods had not been permitted to grow. And then the next paragraph, he says, Black families, regardless of income, are significantly less wealthy than white families. The Pew Research Center estimates that white households are worth roughly 20 times as much as Black households. And that whereas only 15% of whites have zero or negative wealth, more than a third of Blacks do. Right. So these measures had a tremendous impact, right? Keeping African Americans out of the expansion of the middle class. They prevented them from growing their assets in the way that all the rest of the middle class was doing. Okay. and the effects of this have been lingering, right? And as one of you pointed out, well, or maybe I was reading this elsewhere. If you look at redlining, the maps of redlining in Baltimore, the red line neighborhoods are exactly the neighborhoods that are the most desperate now today, that have the most boarded up homes, right? The most poverty, the most violence. So it was a death sentence. The denying FHA insurance to these mortgages in these neighborhoods, this kind of redlining was a death sentence. Okay. I'm going to stop there, see if anybody has any comments or questions at this point. Okay. Well, we'll pick it up there next week. There's more to say about this essay. And right, so for next week, there's no reading assignment, but your papers, you'll be working on your papers. You may hand them in next week before class, but I'll give you the whole day, and I'll be happy to talk to anybody after class as well about their papers. All right? All right, good. So I will see you all later next week, okay? All right, take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Good, thank you.
You.
See ya. Diamond?
Yes.
Hey, do you want to ask me something?
No.
Okay.
All right. Have a good one.
End class. Bye.